All the focus has been on national politics, especially the presidency. Today, we're going to talk to a very special guest about Texas politics and what that means for Texas mortgage bankers and people doing business as mortgage bankers in Texas. This is the Mortgage Banking live stream. Welcome. This is the Mortgage Banking live stream. Today is Veterans Day, November 11th, 2020. We have a very special show for you today. I'm Troy at Garris. We're here to educate, to connect people, to entertain, and we're going to do a quick little regulatory and business update, and then we're going to get into the conversation with our special guest. Very excited about this show today. If you have any questions or you want to contact me to get a topic on the show, right down in the YouTube channel below this video is my contact information. You can text me, you can email me, however you want, and we will make sure to get your questions on the show. We'll make sure to get the topics that you want addressed on the show as appropriate, and we try to get information to you. A couple of shouts out as we get going. The Texas MBA, November 17th and 18th, is having its annual symposium. They're also going to have the Reverse Mortgage Day in connection with that, and that's always a great conference. If you haven't signed up yet, it's your last opportunity. Make sure you do that. Texas MBA is one of the premier institutions in this arena, and I definitely think that you should be involved there and find out more about it and join some of those conferences, including the 17th and 18th. A couple of things to people that help support us here. Dana McElreath over at Mutual of Omaha. Thank you, Dana. Andrew Fishback at Guarantee Home. Great to see you here, Andrew. Brent Duham at Loan Depot. Just great people. Brent runs his own podcast as well. You should check that out. And there's a lot of great content there as well. Quick business update, and with a little bit of regulation fleshed in there as well. So there is currently in the United States what I would call a push, even a zeal perhaps, to get people into positions and to reach out, cast the net wider, to create balances for perhaps past inequities and the like, and that's both in the business context and other contexts, and that it's all probably a very long overdue and a welcome kind of a push, and it's certainly great that people are conscious of this. But I will tell you, especially in the business context, there are a lot of traps there, and people really do need to be careful. We're not going to dive deeply into this, but when we talk about discrimination in employment, for example, there's this whole side of discrimination in lending too, but we're not talking about that. We're talking about in employment. There's very similar types of rules. You can't discriminate based on age, ethnicity, gender, race, all of the types of discrimination that people think about in terms of anti-discrimination laws. But the laws are very complicated, and I see lots of information, lots of people talking about making sure to hire young people, for example. Well, that can be a problem because age discrimination is illegal in a lot of different ways. And I hear a lot of people about, I saw just yesterday on a company that's very public saying we're gonna have a quota for hiring in these particular categories for whatever the various categories are. And quotas are tricky, and quotas have been held a lot of times to be illegal. So if you're thinking about that type of an expansion, probably well intended, but you really do have to be very careful in the types of programs that you enact and that you put in place, because it can get you into a whole world of trouble that you may not have thought about with a well-intended program. A couple of other business points before we jump into our main part of our show. Loan apps are down just slightly, about 0.5%. This is just a typical cyclical market. So we have, loan apps up one day a little bit, loan apps down 1 week rather a little bit, and there's not huge escalations or depreciations either direction. And so that's really actually pretty good news. Forbearances and delinquencies are both down, and those are in the latest numbers, and those are certainly very positive bits of data that have come in. And the delinquencies down in third quarter, down to 7.65%, and loans of forbearance are now under 6% for a few weeks running, and that's quite good news. I will say, because it was up above 8% at one point, but I will say that that number, the numbers declining in forbearances have started to decline at a slower and slower pace, and we are now rolling into what are the first initial periods of forbearance coming to an end. Now those can be extended, and not everybody claimed forbearance right at the beginning. So those numbers will filter out over time. But that's a number certainly that we want to be paying attention to. The mortgage industry still is strong, but we definitely want to keep an eye on that information. A couple other thanks. Joy McGee, thank you, Joy. Great to see you here. My partner, Rich Horn, thanks, Rich, for chiming in there. Mimi Side Paxson, Mimi, it's great to see you. Marissa Vest, I'll tell you guys, just so many wonderful people here. The list just goes on and on. I don't have time to mention everybody this show, but we definitely appreciate all of your support, and we hope that you will continue to send in questions, continue to send in information and topics that you want addressed, and we'll try to get that out to people like yourselves. Today we're going to have a very special guest. I'm going to bring him on now. John Fleming is the partner at Law Offices of John Fleming, but he's also very involved in advocacy, especially in Texas, elsewhere too, but especially in Texas. And then also he is the chief legal counsel for the Texas MBA, and he spends a lot of time at the Capitol and trying to work with people to try to get people educated on how the mortgage banking process works and so on. And so, John, welcome so much to the Mortgage Banking live stream. It's great to see you here.
Always great to see and visit with you, Troy. Hello.
Yeah, thank you. And John, this is the first time I've been able to get you on, and it's just before the session starts up. So, what types of things should mortgage banking people in particular be thinking about as we roll into the legislative session for Texas, just having finished the election?
Well, I think first and foremost thing we're going to have to be thinking about is whether or not we'll even be able to get into the Capitol when the legislature adjourns. COVID continues to impact the way Texas government conducts business. That is not likely to change between now and the time that the legislature is slated to convene in mid-January. Right now, the public is barred from the Capitol, and there's no indication that that will change anytime soon. I think perhaps the best guidance we have on what might happen comes from 1919, when the nation and the world was in the middle of the Spanish influenza. And one of my friends and Capitol rats like me went back and pulled up the journals from the Texas Legislative Service for the 1919 Texas legislature. And what happened in 1919, it appears, in the middle of the Spanish influenza, was that the legislature met as it was constitutionally obligated to do. It elected a Speaker of the House. It enacted its procedural rules for the session, and then it promptly for 30 days to see what happened. And just yesterday, I was picking up rumors that that scenario may be repeated next year, where the legislature convenes, the Texas House elects a new speaker, and we'll talk about that in a minute. They adopt the procedural rules. They may set an outline on how they're going to handle any emergency legislation that may be on the calendar, and I think there will likely be some. And then they're likely to go home and come back in 30 days. Now, that doesn't mean nothing will happen, but much of what has been done in person will probably be converted to Zoom meetings and other alternative means of communication like we have now.
And do you think that that will be a big change in the way that people are able to access? For example, I know that Texas MBA, and you're a critical component of this, has every legislative session an advocacy group that goes and talks with people about whatever particular bills are floating around at the time. Are people still going to be able to do that, but it's just through Zoom, or what are your expectations there?
We don't know.
Yeah.
There's no way to predict that. We do anticipate that we're going to hope for the best and plan for an advocacy day, as we have traditionally done. But the shape of that will be determined on what the coronavirus does. We're not really in control.
Yeah.
We'll just see how that plays out.
And 30 days seems like a short time.
I'm sorry?
30 days, but like back in 1919, seems like a relatively short time. I doubt that after 30 days, everything was just fine.
And what they did back then, from what I understand, is that they did a minimal amount of legislative work. A lot of people would say that's a good thing. They passed a budget, which they're constitutionally obligated to do. They may have handled a few other pieces of legislation, and then they essentially went on.
Yeah.
And the only thing the legislature has to do is pass a budget. And this year there is redistricting that's also going to be on the calendar. That is really pretty much a compelling piece of legislation. That is one that they really need to do. But there's some talk now that rather than handle that in the regular session, which is 140 days commencing in January, that may be something that gets kicked to a special session of the legislature later in the year.
Right.
There's just many unknowns. I do think there are a couple of knowns, and the couple of knowns are what issues do we anticipate are going to be of a concern to us, and they are a continuation of issues that I anticipate will reappear, because they traditionally reappear every session that I've been there on behalf of TMBA. I think you will see bills aimed at curtailing and imposing regulations on how mortgage servicing is done. I think that one of the tasks that we always see in a legislative cycle like this is bills aimed because consumers are complaining about what their mortgage servicers are doing. I think the numbers that you announced, where delinquencies are declining, the foreclosures and loans in forbearance are likewise declining, will ease that. However, I think that it's going to be important for us to watch that as these forbearance periods end and we start having to deal with modifications, that if that is not handled correctly, that we have the possibility that you're going to have a lot of consumers complaining to their state elected representatives in the middle of the legislative session.
Right.
And that can be a complication for us. So I think for all of our members who have servicing, it is critically important to stay ahead of your loss mitigation procedures, to make sure that consumers feel that at least they're getting constant and consistent communication to mediate the effect of what could occur if those people start writing letters and making angry phone calls to their elected representatives.
Right. It seems to me like one of the easiest ways to prevent some regulation being imposed is typically take care of the problem yourself, so that you don't have to have somebody come in and impose regulations when they might, especially if they don't quite understand how the flexibility is working.
Exactly. I think the other key issue that we're going to face is continued concerns about maintaining land priority and guarding against the expansion of programs that lead to super priority lands that come ahead of the mortgage lien. There are rumors that there may be attempts to expand the property assessed clean energy loans or PACE loans to the residential side. Right now in Texas, it is limited to commercial and industrial, which includes multifamily, by the way. But that has a rigorous set of standards and requires lender consent. It does not present the same issues as residential. The commercial size PACE loans typically involve more sophisticated parties having to do and the capability to do more sophisticated analysis. But we're hearing some rumors that there may be an attempt, as there have been in past sessions, to expand PACE lending to consumers. And those of you who followed the issue at the national level know that California had residential PACE. It was an unmitigated disaster. 3 or 4 or 5 years after they started doing that, borrowers kept finding out that their value of the PACE improvements were less than what people were willing to pay on resale. It screwed up a lot of closings. And recently, I'm told some of the major counties in California have actually repealed their residential lending. But that's an issue. We expect that lends involving construction lends will also get a revisit this session. I'm talking to the people involved in those discussions. We were having very constructive discussions at the end of last session. It will need to be dealt with, but those talks have been ongoing over the past 2 years.
Right.
The problem with not being able to get into the building means it's going to be much more difficult to pick up the gossip in the halls,
Right.
and the casual conversations that you have, and the ability to make guerrilla assaults on some of those offices whose support you need because you're responding to something you heard 20 minutes earlier in the Capitol Grill.
Yeah.
So we're going to have to figure out a different way to do that. A lot of people say this is going to be a great session to kill bills. I'm thinking that is probably the case. That is one of the reasons that TMBA really doesn't intend to push for any particular piece of legislation this year because of the nature of the session. Plus, we've been so very successful in past years. It comes back to what my predecessor, Larry Temple, often said about a legislative session. A good legislative session is something in which nothing happens.
And in that regard, any prognostication on the speaker role as we roll into this next session?
Well, we are going to have a new speaker. We know that. The leading candidate and presumptive person to assume that role is Representative Dave Phelan, who is from the Beaumont, Port Arthur, Golden Triangle area in Southeast Texas. He appears to have 90% support of the Republican members of the Texas House, and significant support from the leadership of the Texas Democratic members in the House. So he is likely to be the person who will be installed when the legislature convenes. If you've been following the press, you may have seen that the chairman of the Texas Republican Party, Alan West, has condemned Dave Phelan as being a political traitor for reaching out to Democrats and trying to get their support. I think perhaps, unfortunately, this may be because Chairman West is not a native Texan. He's an import from Florida. He hadn't been here that long and doesn't understand how the Texas House works. The Texas House of Representatives has been a bipartisan body, no matter who the speaker was or which party was in the majority. Ever since I have been following the Texas House of Representatives, there have always been members of both parties as committee chairs. That is one of the reasons that Texas government and the Texas legislature works when Congress does not, because the Texas legislature has found out ways to be truly bipartisan. I think that it was very important yesterday when Governor Abbott congratulated presumptive speaker nominee Dave Phelan of getting the support of the Republicans. And I think the things that you're hearing out of the members of the Texas House of Representatives supports that Dave Phelan is likely to be the speaker. He is not a bomb thrower. He listens to both sides. We anticipate that it will look a lot like something between a Dennis Bonnen speakership and a Speaker Strauss leadership, where there will be a lot of input. Committee chairs will be given discretion to handle bills that come through their committee in a way that benefits the membership as a whole, lets individual members of the Texas House represent their districts, which we think this is a very important concept. We anticipate that that will be a good environment for the Texas mortgage bankers and other lending trade groups to have to work in this legislative session. If you want to expand beyond mortgage servicing, probably the other largest issue that I think will be discussed that will impact TMBA will be data privacy.
Right.
Representative Gio Capriglione of the Dallas-Fort Worth area has been working with a group called the Texas Privacy Advisory Board to look at legislation. He introduced legislation last session that he called California Data Privacy Bill Light. There was a lot of things that were in that bill that we thought were very positive. The most important of which was a total carve out for the financial services industry that was subject to Graham-Leach-Wiley.
Right.
If the transaction is subject to Graham-Leach-Wiley, they're not covered. So that was good. We do agree, however, with other industries that were not excluded, that we really do not need 50 separate approaches to data privacy. We need one national standard, because you may be based in Texas. Texas may be your biggest state, but so many of our members are in multiple states, and they do not need to be subject to 25, 30, or 40, or 50 different standards on data privacy.
Right, and there's all the inconsistencies there. A lot of my clients really are all over the doing business all over the country, and there's a lot of complications there, and inconsistencies, and nobody really knows how to comply with it all, because sometimes they just don't work together. And unfortunately, there's no overarching preemptive type of a push at the moment. So I know I promise not to take a lot of your time. One final question for you is, what can people do? This is an odd year. Normally you would just say, sign up for Texas MBA, come to advocacy, get involved that way. What can people do given that we don't quite know how that's going to shake out? That they can help you or TMBA for that.
Yes. For those of you who live in Texas, not that we discourage people outside of Texas, but we're dealing with the Texas legislature. Sign up for the Advocacy Army through TMBA. That is a grassroots effort on behalf of the Texas Mortgage Bankers Association to mobilize the emails and phone calls on key legislative matters as those bills work their way through the process. And we anticipate that the role of the Advocacy Army will be even more important this year than it has in the past because of what we anticipate will be the physical limitations of the session. Sign up for that. And also be prepared for our advocacy day to look different. We may be fortunate enough, and I think we're going to prepare to have an advocacy day, but we may have variations on that if we're still in a situation where people are not invited to come into the building of the Capitol.
Right.
We may ask you to arrange a Zoom meeting with a key member of a legislature. We just don't know who those people are going to be. Anytime you have a new session, there's no guarantee on who the new committee chairs are going to be. It is likely that the committee chairs from last session will be different from the committee chairs that we'll have this session. And we're going to be, of course, identifying what regions are represented on our key committees to organize the members of our Advocacy Army to be able to deploy as a rapid response force to contact key members when we have legislation that may need some calls from the district. We can do a lot here in Austin, but at the same time, one should never discount that in many, many cases, the member wants to hear for the people who voted to send him to Austin.
Right.
As opposed to some attorney general counsel for a trade association that doesn't get to vote for him back home. So that's going to make it very, very important.
And where can they sign up for the Advocacy Army?
You can go on the TMBA website. I think there's a way to do that.
Yeah, perfect. So that's texasmba.org.
Yeah,
is the website. And so, John, thank you so very much. This is helpful information. If people want to contact you, I know that you're involved in a lot of things, but especially in this regard, how can they contact you directly?
the best way is email John at John Fleming with one M, johnfleminglaw.com.
Awesome. So thank you again. This extremely beneficial information, and I can't tell the viewers how incredibly insightful my conversations with you over the course of the years has been. And all of us in the mortgage banking industry learned so very much from you. And I would say that you're the fountain of knowledge on these issues, and I would encourage anybody interested to talk with you directly.
I consider representing the Texas Mortgage Bankers Association an honor and a privilege, and we're looking forward to the legislative session despite the uncertainties that it brings with it.
That's
Thank
great
you,
to hear.
Troy.
Yeah, thank you so much. So everybody, thank you again for tuning in. Thanks to our supporters, our subscribers. If you think this information is helpful, do subscribe. Just chime the bell on the YouTube channel. Share the link with your friends. Let them know that we have this information out there, and we can get your information also on the channel. And this is the Mortgage Banking live stream. Have a wonderful week.